Katara and the Pirate's Silver has not received quite the same degree of attention as some of the other Avatar graphic novels, and from a certain standpoint, it's easy to understand why. It is not, strictly speaking, essential. It does not reveal a lot of plot information that we did not already know. It does not continue the story of Avatar after its conclusion. It simply details a chapter of what, had it taken place in the show proper, would have been quote-unquote filler. It's interesting, though. It's fascinating for how it demonstrates the problem with received wisdom, the problem with these pre-existing expectations, and how insufficient they are to handle the complexities and mysteries of the world as it is lived, the world as it is experienced. Sensations and impressions of life are constantly unpredictable. They are constantly overturning and undermining all statements of preconceived notions, all already existing beliefs and mores and ideologies. This is inevitably going to happen because any belief system, any method of thinking about the world inevitably is going to be a bit limited. It's inevitably tied to a certain degree to the individual perspective. And the individual perspective is innately narrow compared to the roiling, wild, uncontrollable vastness of things. Our individual self, though connected to that vastness, depends for its individuality, for its self-concept, on a stated or implicit set of beliefs, ideals, values, and conventions about oneself and the world. This is a good thing. We need a solid idea of who we specifically are and what we specifically believe, but these perceptions are inevitably narrow and are inevitably going to be undermined by the quicksilver, constantly amorphous chaos of the world as it is. That does not necessarily lead itself to any simple or clearly intelligible conclusions. This episode demonstrates this contrast, the inadequacy of already existing mores and structures of belief against the rush of experience in several ways, some of which are subtle and thoughtful, and others of which are extremely obvious and a bit blunt. But they are all connected quite well. This is an episode that has a sense of cohesion to it. And by episode, I mean an event that happens, or a series of events. I do not, of course, mean an episode as in an episode of television. Though I can absolutely see a world in which the events of this graphic novel were transformed into 1 or 2 episodes. The Aang storyline is a bit boring here, I must admit, but it serves a purpose. Aang and most of the group meet this Fire Nation soldier who is emphatic that the Air Nation is a threat, that the Air Nation was planning to use its air force, in a sense, the Sky Bisons, in order to attack the Fire Nation. This is, of course, nonsense. This is Fire Nation propaganda, but it is what this Fire Nation soldier believes. Aang and the group try emphatically and a bit obsessively to discredit this belief, but the soldier remains fixed to it. If I were to be a bit uncharitable, I might say that this is a direct response to the proliferation of fake news, quote-unquote, and misinformation that has been a rather large concern for some people in the last few years. Avatar does have a tendency, especially in these graphic novels, to incorporate, in an oblique way, real-world events into the narrative. The election in Republic City in the choreographic novels that takes place after the end of the show, which pits Zhu Li against Raiko, is, I think, a veiled representation of the 2016 election between Hillary Clinton and Trump. It's not so much about the real-world analogs in either case that becomes a bit heavy-handed, but it can be a little clunky. But the important thing I want to note about the plot with the Fire Nation soldier is that it demonstrates an example of what not to do when confronted with new information, with new ideas that transgress against existing beliefs and ideas, which is to completely ignore the new information, to think of it as mere manipulation and subterfuge, and refuse to incorporate it into one's worldview. There are other examples in this graphic novel about people handling new information a bit better. A major conflict here is about Katara and Katara's image in the group as the relatively soft and unadventurous one, the one who is the sweet mother of the group, who is trying to keep everyone safe, whereas Toph is the more dynamic, unpredictable, chaotic rebel who is willing to be a bit more blunt and a bit more forceful in order to do what she believes is right. Now, this is a very shallow read of the differences between the two. As anyone who has watched Avatar would know, if they were paying attention, Toph, despite her gruff exterior, is actually a sweet and tender person who really is anxious about hurting people she cares about, even someone like her parents, who were a bit cruel to her. Katara is the exact opposite, in that she is overtly extremely nice and generous and a bit sentimentally hopeful and idealistic, but in reality, Katara can, in dark situations, be far more hurtful and vehement and violent than Toph would ever imagine being, except, of course, to Fire Nation baddies. Katara has this writhing, virulent darkness within her that is a bit terrifying at times when it comes out, but it's also a major part of what makes her such an interesting character. I was hopeful that the graphic novel would tackle this duality of Katara a bit But it doesn't, and that's okay, because it still is thinking about how adventurous she can be, how Katara is willing to take risks, to be more daring, to have her own adventures. After Katara is made fun of a bit for being a bit soft and a bit too sweet to really engage in the more rough and dark side of life, Katara has her own adventure where she encounters pirates. And she makes friends with the pirates. A different group of pirates from those that Katara antagonizes earlier in Season 1. In her participation in this pirate crew, in her helping them out with their escapades, she demonstrates to Team Avatar that she is not simply this sweet, timid, hope-obsessed girl that they have a bad tendency to think of her as. It's a bit simplistic as a moral, but it's done well enough, and the intentions are good, and the execution is relatively solid. Katara has her own expectations that are undermined, because when she encounters the pirates, especially the head pirate, Zhang, she does not trust them. She sees how cold they appear and how mercenary they seem to be, and does not want to help them. And the pirates play into these expectations by being ostensibly profit-obsessed, callous, exploitative, willing to take advantage of the suffering caused by the war in order to make themselves as much money and profit as possible, putting the desire for wealth above the commitment to the well-being of humanity. But ultimately, this is revealed to be an oversimplification. The pirates are, well, pirates. Zhang is obsessed with the hard, roguish life of a pirate, but she also deeply cares about her people, and she wants to help them, and she is on the side of defeating the Fire Nation. Her morality may not be as pure as that of Team Avatar, but she is deeply committed to her community and her culture and trying to help them, even if that means doing a few cynical and questionably moral things. This is fascinating because it is, in fact, very similar to Katara, who does have a strong sense of morality, but it is not a conventional sense of morality. It is one that is very deeply rooted in the specific people and the specific culture that she cares about. And if she believes that her actions are benefiting them, then she is willing to engage in behavior that is relatively dubious and cynical at times, in its basic forms, as it appears superficially, in order to fulfill these broader idealistic goals of helping those she loves and her people. Think about her time stealing the waterbending scroll. Now, as that episode with the scroll indicates, this deep care for her people is also sometimes used to mask this real, passionate, vehement desire to help herself. It's a bit of selfishness and egotism that she does not want to admit, but exists in her nonetheless. she does genuinely want to help Aang with the scroll, for instance, and she does feel like her culture has been exploited by the pirates, and that's why she steals it, but she also wants to help herself. She's pursuing her own passions and ambitions, her own creativity and desire. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is a side of herself that Katara keeps down a bit. Jang is kind of a version of Katara, wherein that self-aggrandizing element of her character, that desire to help herself and achieve her own ends, is more apparent, but there is still this deep sense of wanting to help out the wider culture as well in a time of turmoil and blight and exploitation. In all of these circumstances, there is the same kinds of messages being propagated. The idea that what seems like common sense might not be sense at all, might be oversimplistic, reductive, or just flat wrong. William James, the great American psychologist, makes the astute argument that what we think of as common sense is really just the accretions of generations and generations of pre-existing beliefs and ideals. There's nothing innate about it, and it is in reality constantly in the process of change. This chapter of Team Avatar's story demonstrates that change. It demonstrates existing beliefs being challenged, and in the case of both Katara's beliefs about Jang being challenged and the team's beliefs about Katara being challenged, the result is ultimately better, and it leads to an expansion of minds and spirits. The Fire Nation soldier, conversely, cartoonishly refuses to reconsider his pre-existing beliefs and is such trapped in ignorance. So anyway, thank y'all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos like this one before anyone else. Keep watching Avatar. Read the graphic novels. They're all ranging from good to genuinely great. And I hope there's more of them. Adios, comrades.